Now we're going to turn our attention to the subject of the day, which is already making me thirsty, because we're talking beer. And it is beer season. To be honest, every bit of year's beer season for me, because I'm a beer drinking boy. Although I am primarily a lager drinker, I can't deny it, but I like a good lager. I like a nice lager. And I love the fact that beer brewing is coming back to London. It was one of the great London industries. Beer and gin, basically, were the foundations of this city. And we saw both of them kind of dwindle away as all the breweries moved out or kind of combined and left or whatever, so that we were only left with one great brewery here, Fuller's over in Chiswick. But in recent years, and certainly very recently, that's been counterbalanced by the emergence of scores of artisan brewers springing up all over London. I've got a map here, and there's almost too many to count. There are just loads of them. So there's clearly something going on with the brewing industry across Britain, but especially here in London, I think. So we thought we'd bring in our favourite beer expert, Jane Peyton, who's the British Beer Sommelier of the Year and also a beer historian and author of a book called Beer O'Clock, which is about 10 minutes from now, I believe. Jane, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Robert.
Let's look. I mean, beer was one of the great London traditions, wasn't it? This was a brewing city.
This was one of the greatest brewing cities in the world. Yeah. In fact, in the 18th and 19th century, London was the beer city of the world. We also introduced beer to the world, really.
Really?
Through our empire and through exploration, trade. All those ships took beer with them. So the love of beer was spread around the world by Britain's exploration.
When would the sort of height of brewing in London have been? When would you have found most people kind of employed in the brewing trade in London, would you say?
The 19th century,
yeah.
And that's when the behemoth brewers came about, people like Charrington's, Whitbread, some that have gone now, actually, that we don't hear of anymore. Courage, actually, they're still around because they still brew Courage Best in Bedford at Youngs and Wells.
Right.
But yes, the 19th century, and that's when London really started growing as a city as well. Millions of people flocked here. It was the Industrial Revolution. It was all about industry. The water was still really bad. We need to remember that the water was terrible. Until the tax on tea was reduced in the mid-19th century, there was no alternative to water apart from beer, a safe source of drinking water.
And small beer was weak beer that you drank instead of drinking water, wasn't it?
It was, so your children would drink that.
Yeah.
And nowadays, if we knew how much alcohol there was in small beer, we'd be shocked.
Really?
There was probably around 2% alcohol in small beer.
You see, my mum liked to drink, she liked a beer. But she never drank water. I mean, she was in her 80s when she died, and she went back to a time where they just didn't trust water. So she would drink beer if she was thirsty of an afternoon and an evening. She'd have a shandy or a small glass of beer, but that's what she drank.
Yes, and millions of people did. And then when Mr. Twinings persuaded the Prime Minister to reduce the tax on tea, then suddenly it became everybody's drink, everybody could afford it, and that's when the consumption of beer started going down.
What sort of beer did we drink? I mean, porter was the most famous of the London ales, wasn't it? Which is the opposite end of the spectrum to what I like. It was a very dark, heavy beer, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And London, well, porter was invented in London, as many other styles of beer were. So yes, porter was the beer of the 18th and 19th century, the early 19th century.
And is that basically a stout?
Well, stout is a porter beer. If you've been in Anorak, it is a style of porter. It's a strong... Stout meant big, so It was a big, strong version of a porter.
Right.
Nowadays, it's a style in its own right.
So, would beer have been drunk by everybody? If you were posh, would you have drunk beer, or would you have had bottles of fine claret and scotch instead or something?
You would have had all those things, but you would have drunk beer no matter who you were, certainly until... probably the early 19th century. You know, people used to have beer delivered to the home. They had dinner ales delivered.
Wow.
I know. It's great, isn't
I
it?
want that.
I want that as well.
We used to get the Corona Man when I was a kid, but that's not quite the same.
So you'd have your dinner ale to drink with dinner, with your meals, and everybody would drink it.
And would people go to pubs to drink as well? Were pubs and beer kind of synonymous with each other?
Pubs and beer always were completely synonymous. In fact, the pub means public house, but it came out of the ale houses. And the ale houses were where the female brewers of the medieval era and earlier were brewing beer in their own homes and selling any surplus, inviting people into the kitchen. Here you are, love, have a pint of ale. And that was where the pubs came from. But really, decent women didn't go into pubs.
No.
I mean, I remember going into pubs as a teenager, and still in those days it was...
People would look when you walked in, yeah.
Absolutely, and especially if I ordered a pint of beer. Terrible.
You hussy.
I know.
Where did it all go wrong? When did the decline set in? And certainly in London, the breweries started to disappear or leave town or whatever it was.
When breweries started to amalgamate and turn into massive corporations, then
was that what, 60s, 70s?
Probably earlier than that. It will have started earlier than that, but it did reach its height probably in the 60s and 70s. Also, by that point, kegged beers had come into fashion.
Right.
Which
For those who don't know the difference, explain.
It's the opposite to if you go into a pub and you see somebody hand pumping your beer with the hand pulls, that's known as cask conditioned ale. That's the natural way that beer should be served, and that's the British way. Now, that sort of beer goes off very quickly, and you need to care for it very carefully as well. So you need lots of training. It's much better if you can have a beer that's going to last you ages because you don't get as much wastage. So these styles of beer called kegged beers came in, which is basically pasteurising the beer.
Right.
You're giving it a longer lifespan, but you're taking away a lot of flavour. So when these styles of beer, or this fashion for kegged beer, came in, that was really the decline, because people started going, well, it just all tastes the same, so...
What doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And also, I guess, you can transport that further. You don't need breweries that are local to where they're drunk and stuff like that. Is that part of it as well, do you think?
That's probably absolutely right. And so you might get humongous brewers in Reading, for instance. Yeah. They can make millions of pints of beer a week, and they can transport it.
Would this have been the era of the Party 7 and all those, all those sort of things?
What is Party 7?
Yeah.
Exactly, yes.
Where does lager fit into all this? Because I am primarily a lager drinker, particularly on a hot day. I like a pale ale as well. When did we start drinking lager?
Well, most people would say it was the 60s and 70s, particularly the 70s, but in the late 19th century, there was a lager brewery in Tottenham.
Was it?
Yes.
God, good old Tottenham.
I know. Austro-Bavarian Lager Brewing Company and Crystal Ice Company. Now, that's important.
Because lager needs to be served cold.
It does, and it needs to be matured and conditioned in cold conditions as well.
Right.
But really, we started drinking what we call pilsners. That's the pale carbonated beer that most people call lager. Really, it started in the 70s when the international companies started marketing beer into Britain and putting lots of money into brands and marketing.
And is that essentially a Germanic drink? I mean, we think of Austria and Germany and maybe Belgium and whatever, but is it a kind of European drink, essentially?
It was actually invented, Pilsner was invented in the Czech Republic in a town called Pilsen.
Right.
But it came, the knowledge and the yeast and the skills came from Germany, from German brewers, but they also came from British brewers. Now, we weren't brewing the lager style beers, but what we were doing, what the brewers were doing, they had great malting techniques for the barley. They had certain brewing techniques, and they were also brewing pale beers. Right. And the pale beer was very important. So there was a bit of skullduggery going on, some industrial spy espionage. Some German brewers came over to Britain and started doing a little bit of skullduggery and took their knowledge back to Germany, which then went to the Czech Republic, which is when the Pilsner styles came.
Why do real beer fanatics, and you're clearly one of those, why do they sort of look down upon lagers, do you think?
Because lager Pilsner in particular is a very narrow style, and there isn't much latitude in it.
Not much you can do with it, really.
Not really. And also, it doesn't have an awful lot of flavour.
Right.
And the newer beer drinkers nowadays, we've got so much choice now. There's incredibly flavoursome beers. There's no rules anymore in brewing. You can do a hybrid of this, a hybrid of that. There are lots of beers called black IPAs. IPA stands for India Pale Ale.
How can you have a black pale ale?
Exactly. It's an
oxymoron,
oxymoron, isn't it?
Terms, yeah.
But there's all these rules have gone now. And so Pilsner is still very much in this narrow band. And so people who want more adventurous and tasteful and tasty, I should say, and flavoursome beers, it's not their beer. Pilsner is not their style.
Right. Why do you think we are seeing, and we definitely are, this revival in, for want of a better term, artisan beers, particularly here in London?
I think it came from the foodie revolution that's been happening for about 15 years.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true.
Also, people want to know the provenance of their food and drink. And beer is probably the most local thing you can get because it's made down the road and you're drinking it. You may be drinking it even in the pub. There's lots of brew pubs now. So you know where your beer is made. You can see the brewer. You can see the ingredients. Also, I think people are sort of going back to basics and they want things that are more honest and more craft-orientated. You know, humans actually made that beer rather than it just be a big... Well, the bottom line, it's, the huge companies who brew millions of pints a day. Basically, that's money. It's not, who's our drinker? What are we giving them? How are we enticing them and engaging with them?
Is there a danger, just to play devil's advocate, that it's a bit like facial hair for men. It's very fashionable at the moment, and 2 years from now it will all have gone again. And in fact, I kind of almost combine it with facial hair for men. They're all in East London. They're all made by blokes with trendy beards, with a slightly Amish kind of attitude. Do you see what I mean, though? That it's a trend, and trends have a habit of going away.
I've been concerned about this as well, and the trend is we'll always look for the next big thing.
Yeah, and gin, for example, or mead, exactly. or ciders, or artisan ciders, or whatever it might be.
Exactly. I think there are enough beer drinkers in this country, and it is our national drink.
Yeah.
I think there are enough people who are now consumed with drinking beer. They love it and they're passionate about it. I think there are enough people to maintain this desire for beer. What I would say is that all these amazing new breweries that are opening up, we need to get more people drinking beer, otherwise they're going to be closing because there won't be the drinkers there to drink it. We need to get more people drinking beer. If we can get more women drinking beer, then automatically we have 50% of the population who are now coming into beer drinking.
And as far as I'm concerned, we also need to get more people drinking their beer in the pub rather than just at home. Because if you're going to drink at home, in the end, it becomes a kind of lowest common denominator thing. Now, you may sit at home and drink expensive craft beers, but more likely, I would have thought, you're going to go to the supermarket and get, as cheap as you can. Whereas if it's a social experience and you're going out to enjoy the event as well as just to get drunk or whatever it might be, that's going to help, isn't it?
Definitely. I would always suggest to people to drink beer in a pub because it's a convivial social drink.
Yeah.
Also, with the ales, the new wave of beers, these really flavoursome, tasty ones. If you go to a pub that has great beer, look around, the groups of friends who are saying to each other, "Oh, smell that, taste that, try that." They're sharing. It's this communal thing. You don't get that with the Pilsner drinkers.
No. Although, you see, for example, my local pub has been taken over by the Camden Hills Brewery, which is fantastic. And I like their lager. It suits me. I think I quite like their pale ale as well. So I will now go there to have a pint of that because I like it. And I don't mind paying, the £4, whatever it is for, I do mind, but I accept that that's what it costs. So it isn't just the real ale brigade, is it?
No, it's not, because a lot of those beers are what are called filtered or kegged beers.
Yeah.
So they don't count as real ale.
No.
But it is younger people coming into it, and now people are using pubs as destinations. Yeah. And if the beer's fantastic, they will go and they'll travel. I do. I've got a fantastic app called Craft Beer London.
Right.
And I'll check it regularly, and it's updated all the time, and I'll go, "Oh, I haven't tried that new place. Oh, they've got so-and-so beers. I need to go there." So I'll get a group of friends together. We'll make a trip to go out there. So beer does make people travel and it excites them. So yes, the pubs are coming back to life if they've got the right offering, which is beer, great ciders, great food, good
and
wine,
good
service, great
well.
atmosphere.
Yeah, that's probably the most important of the lot, I think, isn't it? If you were picking a couple of your particular favourites of the newer London beers, what would you go for?
Can I go for the breweries instead?
Of course you can.
I absolutely love Wildcard. They're in Walthamstow, in Walthamstow.
Right.
And they have open days on a Saturday. Wildcard Brewery. They have the greatest open days, and you'll probably know this place, Robert, the God's Own Junkyard, the neon
Yeah,
sign.
I know him, yeah.
Yes. So they are there by the God's Own Junkyard. Okay. So in that whole yard, they take over the yard on Fridays and Saturdays. Great days out and evenings. Beavertown, they've just moved to Tottenham. Fantastic beers, Gamma Ray, there's a smoky porter, just great beers, really flavoursome. Beavertown
Good
used
name.
to be in de Beauvoir Town.
Okay, so
and now
that
they're
would
in
make sense
Tottenham
for it, yeah.
because they've grown, so they need bigger premises. Love Meantime, great beers from Meantime. The Colonel beers in Bermondsey, fab.
Don't know that one.
They do bottled beers mostly. They do a really great pale ale. So you
see, so is that snobbery against bottled beers and all that vanishing, do you think?
Yes, it is, because you're now getting fantastic beers in bottles.
Yeah.
And a lot of pubs now have a really great beer menu of bottles.
Yeah.
And quite often, I love real ale, and that would be my first choice, but I'll look in the bottled beer selection and I'll go, what's that?
Looks good,
Give
yeah.
it a try. And do you know what the future is? Canned beers.
Really?
Beer in cans.
Why?
Because it's a much better receptacle to keep your beer in.
Is it? It doesn't look as cool.
If they've got good branding and you've got a bigger space to put your branding,
because
your
you can't
artwork,
drink out of a can. You can drink out of a bottle.
That's true, but what you'd do with the can, you'd pour it into your glass.
Yeah.
But it keeps the beer in better condition. The light can't get through the glass to ruin the beer. It's much easier to transport. You don't get breakages. Also, it's lighter, so in terms of just carrying, it's a lot lighter. So that's the future. Can I just give you a
quickly.
quick
Very
put something
quickly.
into context?
Yeah.
In 1419, there were 290 breweries in London.
Yeah.
There were 45,000 people who lived in London.
Wow.
Today, there are over 70 breweries in London, but there are 8.3 million people.
Oh, we need to drink more. Jane Peyton, where can people find out more about what you do, Jane?
I have a website called School of Booze.
Schoolofbooze.com from the brilliant Jane Peyton.
Listen to Robert live on BBC London 94.9, weekdays from midday or online at bbc.co.uk/London.